Hello BookTube, this is Weekly Reads. April is National Poetry Month, and to celebrate National Poetry Month, I've devoted my first week's reading of April to poetry. So from last Friday to this Friday, I've only been reading poetry. To caveat my discussion, my kind of sort of reviews, my thoughts on these poems and collections. I like poetry, but I'm not terribly good at talking about poetry. So keep that in mind. I'm not terribly good at talking about poetry. I'll talk about the poetry. I'll start with the rereads and then the new and selected collection that I haven't read yet. And then I'll talk about the slim volumes of poetry, the individual collections, in the order in which I like them, from my favorite to my least favorite. After that, I will talk about the books I'll be reading this coming reading week. And then I'll talk a bit about my tag situation. I've been trying to work on an original tag for the past few weeks, and I was meaning to get that tag up this past week, and I failed. And I'll talk a bit about that. And then at the very end, I will try to answer a question I asked Steve Donahue for his 12.4K Q&A. So we'll get to that at the end. So, in a BookTube, let's get going with some poetry. So, I reread two works of poetry. I'll start with the poem that it's been the longest since I last read it. And that is Omeros by Walcott. Omeros is Walcott's magnum opus. It is an epic poem that draws on Homer and Greek mythology to tell the story of Derek Walcott's native St. Lucia, which is a Caribbean island nation. So the poem is split into a number of narratives. A good chunk of the poem is about a small village named Troy near the town of Grosselet on St. Lucia. And among the stories featured, most prominently is a love triangle between two fishermen, Achille and Hector, who are both in love with the incredibly beautiful Helene, who is was a maid for the Plunketts. Major Plunkett was a British Army officer in World War II, who along with his wife Maud retired to St. Lucia to run a pig farm. Other characters appearing are Philoctet. He is another fisherman who has been grievously wounded for some time. Seven Seas, who's a blind elderly man who's a bit of a Homer stand-in. Ma Kilman, who is a sort of a Cersei stand-in, and a number of other characters. Spinning off from this main narrative are two historical jaunts. Major Plunkett is trying to write a history of St. Lucia for Helen because he's kind of in love with her. And so he discovers that there was a midshipman Plunkett who served in St. Lucia during one of Britain's interminable wars with France over the Caribbean, and also during a fishing expedition. Achille has a vision of himself going back in time, or going to a sort of version of his ancestral village in Africa. shortly before it was devastated by slave raiders who enslaved the population, and Ashiel sort of goes along that journey, to where I think it ends with him on the ship. There's also Derek Walcott, who appears as a character in multiple ways. In part, he is a Dante-like figure who's being sort of guided by Homer rather than Virgil. And Walcott also appears as a character in some of the Troy stories. So, yeah. So, it's been about 15 years since I read Omeros. I read it for a class. It was a senior... I don't quite remember what the course's title was, but it was basically a senior class in English that you took before you graduated. And it was basically taught by one of the professors on a rotating basis. And when I took the class, the professor Altamont, he is a poetry expert, and so he decided to look at modern epic poems or poetic novels and try to figure out what are these poems, these long narrative poems. Are they epics? Are they novels? What are they? So alongside Omeros, we read Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson, The Adventures of Freddie Neptune by Les Murray, and a fourth modern epic poem that I don't remember the title or the author. I want to say it might be Glenn Maxwell, but I could be wrong. The fourth one was terrible. Everybody agrees it was terrible. Anyway, so back to Omeros. I remember quite liking Omeros when I first read it. Although in second place to Autobiography of Red, that was my favorite of the four. But this rereading, I don't like it as much. And I don't know if necessarily it's because my first reading was guided. Obviously, it was being taught. And so there was the crutch of Professor Altamont's teaching and lecturing on the poem. Or if it was that Omeros was read over the course of several days instead of over the course of several hours on a Saturday. But whatever it is, my rereading of Omeros wasn't as, or isn't as positive as I remember the poem being originally. And there are a number of points of the poem that I remember that didn't quite happen as I remember it, because I could have sworn the final scene of the poem is Ashiel dancing at a celebration in the village, and the song Buffalo Soldier is playing. And that's not actually the ending. I mean, the scenes do take place, it's just the Buffalo Soldier song played during a political celebration takes place about in the middle, and then Ashiel's dance is about 3/4 of the way through. So, but while I didn't necessarily enjoy this rereading, I'm glad I did reread it, because I had been wanting to reread Omeros for a while, and I think this rereading has sort of put this nostalgia I have for my readings for being an English lit major when I went to school for, kind of in perspective. So on that level, I'm kind of pleased. Although I didn't really talk a whole lot about that point, but anyway, so that was Omeros. My Sunday reading was a lot more positive, though, and that was A little more written on the Human by Gillian Conoley. This is a new and selected collection of hers that is noted by the fact that Conoley takes a somewhat unique approach to organizing her new and selected collection. Normally, in a selected edition of poetry, the new poems will be separated, and then the collected poems will be organized via the collections they appeared in as subsections or sections of the overall collection. Conoley doesn't do that in this collection. She organizes, she has a separate sort of organizational scheme, although the poems are still collected by the collections in which they appear. So the final section, I think it's section 7, yes, next, are the new poems, and then the poems that appear in the other sections are sort of kind of grouped together in about a chronological order of the collections, which I originally thought it was completely like a new organization, but anyway. So when I first read this book last year, I liked it, but I wasn't in love with it. And this rereading, I'm very much more in love with this collection. It is an amazing collection. I loved pretty much every poem I read, so it's very, very positive. Then moving to today, the poem I just finished, or the collection I just finished, and that was Before Our Eyes, New and Selected Poems, 1975 to 2017, by Eleanor Wilner. I really enjoyed this collection. It is amazing. I particularly liked her usage of mythology in a lot of her poems. It's really good. I think my one issue with the collection is that she starts with her new work and then sort of backpedals through her work so that the last poems in the collection are her earliest poems. And I'm not entirely sure I like that organizational schema compared to sort of a more kind of like starting with the earliest collection and then working your way to the present at the end. Although I actually would like to see somebody try to do the, like what I mentioned earlier, and just completely reorganize a new and selected collection. But anyway, so I really did enjoy Before Our Eyes. So let's move on to the slim volumes of poetry that I've been working my way through this past week. So my favorite of these, well, that was a spoiler, 11. So these 11 collections of poetry, my favorite is First Night by Niall Campbell. These poems are generally all about rural life in Britain, and they just blew me away. Every single poem completely blew me away. I loved this collection immensely. My second poem, or the second collection I liked, like my number 2, is Scaffolding by Elena Rivera. These are poems that are sonnets that deal with life in New York City, and again, they are amazing. I really loved every poem in this collection too. Very, very good. Number 3 is Radioactive Starlings by Myronn Hardy. These are political poems that are immensely powerful. Number 4 is Syllabus of Errors by Troy Jollimore. This is a very strong collection, very sort of formal, very sort of technical, and just really, really good. Number 5 is The Two Yvonnes by Jessica Greenbaum. These are incredibly good confessional poems. I think the strongest poem in this collection is The First Youngest Men, and I think there's another one. It's really good too. But yeah, I quite like this collection. So number 6 is The Ruined Elegance by Fiona Sze-Lorrain. I've previously read Fiona Sze-Lorrain's work, her more recent The Rain in Plural, which I quite liked. This one I didn't quite like as much. And the same is true, although in the opposite direction, of Peter Campion's One Summer Evening at the Falls. Now, this is his most recent work, and I didn't like it nearly as much as his much earlier work, The Lions. Although One Summer Evening at the Falls is a very good poem, both of them. Next is Prospects by Judith Hall. These are poems that are a bit experimental. They're mostly about economic life, and they were okay, but they didn't exactly wow me. And I'm sad to say that I didn't particularly care for A Glossary of Chickens by Gary J. Whitehead. These poems are very similar to the poems in First Nights by Niall Campbell, in that they are largely about rural life, but these just didn't have that something that Niall Campbell's work did. Next is Bridled by Amy Meng. These are confessional poems that really didn't do it for me. About the only thing that I can say is that I really love this cover. So my least favorite, or the collection that I ranked at the bottom of these 11, is Stet by Dora Malik. These poems are about language, about trying to do interesting things with language, and I don't think it succeeded at all. So that was a week's worth of poetry, and I am thoroughly poetried out. I'm probably not going to be reading any poetry for the foreseeable future, and in fact I'm kind of thinking about taking a bit harder look at the poetry I've got, even though it is a perpetually paltry poetry collection. Anyway, I was thinking about picking up some poetry from the University of Chicago, because one of their ever-running sales is there's a good poetry contingent to that. So, but not entirely sure, because there's a whole lot of other things I want to pick up from the University of Chicago Press, and a whole lot of other things in general. So we shall see. Anyway, so what will I be reading this coming reading week? So this weekend is going to be a Bell Redemption. I'm hoping over the weekend to Bell redeem The Opium War by Julia Lovell. This is a history of the Opium War, primarily the First Opium War, as well as how that Opium War sort of affected Britain and China throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century, and even into the 21st century. So I tried this. So I think this was going to be the second book I read in 2022 as part of my name tag TBR and as part of No Fiction 2022. Unfortunately, while I was reading this book, I had a mental issue that sort of wrecked my reading of this book, and sort of is still, in a way, I think, reverberating through the months that had followed. So hopefully, rereading The Opium War, or having a second go at The Opium War, will be much successful than the first. I hope. So over the course of the work week, I'm hoping to get to Priest of Gallows by Peter McLean. This is the third volume in his War for the Rose Throne series. Yeah. So these novels are about a organized crime boss named Thomas Piety, who in the first book, Priest of Bones, has returned to his hometown of Ellenburg from a war and finds that his territories, his businesses have been taken from him. In the first book, he works to regain his businesses while also working as a Queensman, or as a not as a Queensman himself, but as a sort of a agent of the Queensmen to sort of combat hostile foreign elements in the city. In the second book, Priest of Lies, he sort of rises pretty much to political power and still struggling to combat the his criminal rivals and their foreign backers. And then in this book, it's him in an even higher position and sort of something, I don't know. We'll find out this week. Or I'll find out this week. So if I finish Priest of Gallows with enough time, which I probably should, I do blitz through those books, although that has been on rereadings. But anyway, so if I do have enough time this week, I'm also going to try to get to either Somebody Loves You by Mona Archie. This was longlisted for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, and I had a bit of a desire or hunger for literary fiction and more literary work, so I picked this up. And also, I will try The Spell by Alan Hollinghurst, which I should have gotten to in March for my kind of nebulous Alan Hollinghurst reading project, although it kind of fell apart with my bail of The Folding Star. But I have read The Spell before, and I do remember quite liking it. It's about four gay men, an architect, his younger boyfriend, that boyfriend's ex-partner, and the architect's son, who becomes involved with the ex-boyfriend. So I remember quite liking it, but it has been a while since I've read it, and looking forward to having another go at it. Now, obviously, depending how long it takes me to read Priest of Gallows, I don't know if I will have enough time to get to either one of these. And if I don't, then I will set it aside for sometime later this month. Because I do have plans for this coming weekend. So we'll see how that turns out. Although now that I think about it, it might be a bit of a problem, but I'll work on it next Friday. So anyway, let's move on to my tag issue. So I've been working on an original tag for about a month now. This tag was originally intended to celebrate me getting 1,000 books in my collection. And I was going to do this tag on the thought that if I did do a Q&A call, I wouldn't get much of a response. I was pleasantly wrong about that. I got 4 commenters ask questions, 2 of them a barrage, so I had enough questions to do a pretty good, decent-sized Q&A. But I still wanted to do an original tag. I try to do one once a year, and this time I was going to do 100 questions, like 100 random questions, divided into 4 parts, each of 25 questions. So I've been trying to film that video intermittently this past week. I was originally planning on doing it on Monday, for Tuesday's Tag Tuesday. But I didn't quite like how it turned out, and looking at the time, it was like 20 some odd minutes, and I was not even halfway through the questions. And then throughout the rest of the week, I didn't really have time to try another go at the quest tag. So today, I was going to film, have another filming attempt of it. And I got through most of the questions. The video was 37 minutes long, and I was interrupted by FedEx. So I had to scrap that video. But as I was thinking about it, some of the tags are really interesting. I mean, some of the questions are really interesting, and some of them aren't. So I think I might be retooling my original tag for this year and doing a sort of a more targeted one rather than just random questions. So that way it's not a massively long video. And so there's not a whole lot of I don't know what the word is for it. A variance in quality of the questions. Also, some of the questions I asked, I myself kind of weaseled out of answering. So probably should kind of excise those questions. So yeah, that was pretty much an update for my tag video. Hopefully I will be able to do my revised tag on Monday. Hopefully. Of course, I've been saying that for about a few weeks now, so yeah. Maybe I should just go back to what I normally do and ask book-related questions of themed around whatever pop culture genre fiction I'm enjoying at the moment. Anyway, so now finally on to the questions. So this past Wednesday, Steve Donahue and Michael K. Vaughan every Wednesday, Michael K. Vaughan and Steve Donahue talk about comic books. It's Epic Comic Book Wednesdays. And this past week, Michael K. Vaughan picked Secret Wars to talk about. It's a 12-part maxi series that Marvel put out almost like 37 years ago. Because it came out a year after I was born, which is insane. But anyway. And it basically featured a super powerful alien entity named the Beyonder, who gathered X number of heroes and X number of villains to sort of fight. And I asked Steve Donahue in his 12.4K Q&A call who he would have put as the heroes and the villain teams. And then it got me to thinking, well, what's my answer to this question? Who would I put on such a team? And I've been thinking about that, and I'm still thinking about it. I have a bit of an answer, but I'm not entirely sure, and I do want to do a bit more research on the villains. So yeah, and this video is getting incredibly long, so I think what I might do is I might do a special video on Monday, whether or not I do my original tag and answer my own question for who I would pick for the hero and villain teams for a Secret Wars style throwdown. So anyway, BookTube, look forward to hopefully an original tag video, my Secret Wars answer, and whatever else I decide to make next week. So anyway, BookTube, until next week, thank you, have a great weekend, and stay safe.